A gavel silenced by a slap. A courtroom frozen in disbelief. When two racist officers strike a quiet black woman in a federal courthouse, they think it's just another abuse of power they'll get away with. What they don't realize? She's not an attorney. She's not a witness. She is federal judge Elise Montgomery, and in exactly 7 minutes, the corrupt system they've built over decades will begin to unravel. This is a story about power, justice, and what happens when those who enforce the law forget they aren't above it. Watch until the end. The final revelation will leave you speechless. Let us know where you're watching from and what time you found this. We read every single comment. Detroit's federal courthouse stands like a fortress against the Michigan sky. 12 stories of limestone and justice. Or at least that's what the architects intended. Inside those walls, however, justice has become more of a suggestion than a promise, especially for those without the right skin color or the right connections. Judge Elise Montgomery knows this better than most. At 58, she carries the weight of history in her deliberate stride, in the silver that now threads through her natural hair, and in eyes that have witnessed 30 years of a system that bends but rarely breaks. As the first black female federal judge appointed to this district, she spent a career being underestimated, overlooked, and challenged. She's also spent it proving exactly why that was a mistake. This crisp autumn morning, Judge Montgomery arrives at her chambers earlier than usual. The security guards nod with genuine respect. They know her, not just her title. She's earned that. But her mind isn't on pleasantries. It's on the case file waiting on her desk. United States v. Marcus Reynolds, a police brutality case that somehow made it past all the barriers typically designed to protect officers from accountability. "Morning, Your Honor," her clerk Daniel says, already at his desk, sorting through motions. "Officers Palmer and Reeves are already here. They seem..." He searches for the diplomatic word. "Eager." Elise raises an eyebrow. "They're 2 hours early." "Yes, ma'am. They've been asking when you'll be taking the bench." Elise has heard about these two. Detective James Palmer and Sergeant William Reeves, 20 years on the force, 13 excessive force complaints between them, 0 disciplinary actions. They're part of an elite narcotics unit that operates with near impunity in Detroit's predominantly black neighborhoods. Their testimony has sent hundreds to prison, many on questionable evidence that never seems to get questioned enough. "I'll be ready in 30 minutes, she says, hanging her coat. "And Daniel? Pull the complete records on both officers. Every case they've testified in over the last 5 years. Daniel nods, understanding perfectly well what isn't being said. Judge Montgomery enters her private bathroom, changes into her judicial robe, and studies her reflection. Her mother's voice echoes in her memory. "They'll always see your color first, Elise. Make sure they see your dignity second." She smooths the robe, touches the small silver pin on her lapel. A gift from her late husband James, a civil rights attorney who'd fought these same battles from a different angle, and prepares to face a day she doesn't yet know will change everything. The courtroom is unusually full for a preliminary hearing. The gallery holds a mix of law students, reporters, and community activists. Marcus Reynolds' case has touched a nerve. A 19-year-old honor student beaten so severely during an arrest that he spent 2 weeks in intensive care. The official report claimed he had reached for an officer's weapon. The cell phone video that surfaced 2 months later showed his hands were clearly empty and raised. Officers Palmer and Reeves sit at the prosecution table, uniforms pressed, backs straight, confidence radiating off them like heat. They've been here before. They know how this usually ends. Palmer is tall, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped gray hair and a face that might have been handsome if not for the permanent disdain etched around his mouth. Reeves is younger, leaner, with cold blue eyes that constantly scan the room like he's looking for threats. Judge Montgomery isn't in her robes yet when she enters from the side door. She wants to review some documents at the clerk's table first. In a simple charcoal suit, she could be mistaken for an attorney or court reporter. "When's this judge showing up?" Palmer asks loudly, checking his watch. "Some of us have real work to do." "I heard she takes forever," Reeves adds. "Probably reviewing the basics of law enforcement since she's never worn the badge." Elise doesn't react. She's heard worse. She continues reviewing the file, making notes on inconsistencies in the officer's statements versus the medical reports. Palmer stands, stretches, and walks toward the clerk's table. He looks down at Elise, not recognizing her. "Hey, can you tell Montgomery we're waiting? Or is she too busy with her diversity luncheon?" Elise looks up calmly. "You'll address the judge as Your Honor, Detective Palmer, and you'll return to your seat until court is in session." Palmer's face flushes with anger. "Who do you think you're talking to, lady? You some kind of clerk. Know your place." The courtroom has gone eerily quiet. The court reporter has stopped typing. The bailiff has taken a step forward. "I suggest you return to your seat, Detective," Elise says evenly. Palmer leans down, voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Listen, I don't take orders from—" And then it happens. Reeves has joined his partner, irritation mixing with arrogance. "We're not going to be disrespected by some secretary," he says. And without warning, his open palm strikes Elise's cheek with a crack that echoes through the stunned courtroom. Time freezes. A collective gasp ripples through the gallery. The court reporter's hands hover motionless above her machine. The bailiff's hand moves to his holster. Elise doesn't flinch. She doesn't raise a hand to her stinging cheek. She simply turns her head slowly to look directly at Reeves, then at Palmer, with eyes that could freeze fire. "Bailiff," she says, her voice calm but carrying to every corner of the now silent room. "Please escort me to my chambers. I'll be taking the bench in 5 minutes." The bailiff moves quickly to her side, shooting a warning glance at the officers who stand frozen, confusion beginning to dawn on their faces. As Elise rises and walks toward her chambers, the clerk leans over to the officers and whispers, "That was Judge Montgomery." The color drains from Palmer's face. Reeves takes an involuntary step back. For the first time in their careers, they feel something unfamiliar. Fear. In her chambers, Elise sits at her desk, finally allowing herself a single deep breath. Her cheek burns, but it's nothing compared to the fire now lit within her. She picks up the phone and dials a number from memory. "This is Judge Montgomery. I need you in my courtroom immediately." "Yes, it's time." Exactly 7 minutes after the slap, Judge Elise Montgomery re-enters the courtroom through the main doors, now wearing her judicial robe. She ascends to the bench with measured steps as the bailiff calls, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Elise Montgomery, United States District Court, Eastern District of Michigan." The room stands. Officers Palmer and Reeves rise slowly, their expressions a mixture of shock and dawning horror. Judge Montgomery takes her seat, arranges her papers, and looks out at the courtroom with unwavering authority. "Be seated," she says. The gallery sits, but she adds, "Not you, Detective Palmer, not you, Sergeant Reeves. You will remain standing." They stand rigid, eyes forward. "Let the record show," Judge Montgomery begins, her voice steady, "that approximately 10 minutes ago, while reviewing documents in this courtroom, I was physically assaulted by Sergeant William Reeves in the presence of Detective James Palmer. This assault occurred after both officers made several derogatory remarks regarding my race, gender, and position. Murmurs ripple through the gallery. A reporter in the back row is frantically taking notes. "Your Honor," Palmer begins, "there's been a misunderstanding." "Silence," Judge Montgomery says, not raising her voice but investing it with such authority that Palmer immediately stops speaking. "You will speak when I direct you to speak, Detective. That moment is not now." She turns to the bailiff. "Please, secure the doors. No one enters or leaves without my express permission." The bailiff nods and signals to the court security officers. I'm now going to do something unprecedented," Judge Montgomery continues. "Based on what has just transpired in this courtroom, I am invoking the court's inherent power to investigate contempt committed in its presence." She looks directly at Palmer and Reeves. "Both of you are now under investigation for criminal contempt of court, assault on a federal judge, obstruction of justice, and civil rights violations. You will surrender your badges, firearms, and credentials to the bailiff immediately." Reeves steps forward, panic replacing his arrogance. "Your Honor, please, I didn't know who you were. It was a mistake. Would it have been less of a mistake if I had been a clerk, a witness, a janitor?" Judge Montgomery asks, her gaze unwavering. "The fact that you didn't recognize me as a judge does not mitigate your actions, Sergeant. It illuminates them." The courtroom doors open, and 3 people enter. A stern-faced woman in a dark suit who carries herself with unmistakable authority. A younger man with a laptop bag, and an older black man whose presence seems to physically affect the officers. Their postures stiffen further. "The court recognizes Federal Bureau of Investigation Special Agent in Charge Diana Miller, Department of Justice Civil Rights Division Attorney Marcus Washington, and retired Internal Affairs Captain Joseph Bell," Judge Montgomery announces. She turns to them. "You've arrived just in time. We have a situation that requires immediate attention." Captain Bell's eyes narrow as he looks at Palmer and Reeves. These are men he knows well, men whose files crossed his desk repeatedly during his 27 years in internal affairs, men who always seem to slip through the cracks of accountability. "Your Honor," FBI Agent Miller says, "we've been monitoring Officers Palmer and Reeves for the past 14 months as part of a broader federal investigation into police corruption within their unit. What happened here today will be added to that investigation." The gallery erupts in whispers. Judge Montgomery gavels once for silence. "Captain Bell," she says, "you've brought the files I requested." The retired IA captain nods and places a thick accordion folder on the clerk's desk. "Every complaint, every investigation, every instance where these officers' reports didn't match the evidence, and the names of everyone who helped bury it all." Palmer lunges forward suddenly. "You can't do this. You don't have the authority." "We were just doing our jobs." The bailiff restrains him as Judge Montgomery's voice cuts through the chaos. "Your job, detective, was to uphold the law, not place yourself above it." She stands, looking out at the courtroom filled with witnesses. To history unfolding, court is in recess for 1 hour. When we reconvene, Mr. Washington will present initial findings from the DOJ investigation. Officers Palmer and Reeves will be remanded to federal custody pending formal charges. As the bailiff leads the officers away, their faces frozen in disbelief, Judge Montgomery adds one final comment. "And we will hear testimony from Marcus Reynolds, whose case brought us all here today. Because this court has not forgotten why we are truly here. To seek justice for a young man who deserved protection from those sworn to provide it, not brutality at their hands." The gavel falls with the finality of truth long delayed, but no longer denied. In her chambers during the recess, Elise finally allows herself to touch her cheek, now slightly swollen. The door opens after a brief knock, and Captain Bell enters, his face etched with concern and admiration. "Elise," he says, reverting to the first name of a colleague he's known for decades. "Are you all right?" She nods. "I'm fine, Joseph, but I wouldn't be if that video hadn't surfaced in the Reynolds case. How many others weren't so lucky?" Bell sighs, heavily. "Too many. I tried, Elise. For years I tried to build cases against them, against the whole unit. Files disappeared. Witnesses changed statements. Complaints were buried." "I know," she says. "That's why I called you when this case landed. On my docket, I knew it wasn't just about Marcus Reynolds." "It never is," Bell says, his voice weary with the weight of too many failures. "But what happened today? They've never been this brazen before. Because they've never had to face consequences before," Elise says. "Today that changes. There's..." Another knock, and FBI agent Miller enters with DOJ attorney Washington. "Judge Montgomery," Miller says, "all business now that they're behind closed doors. What happened today accelerates everything. We've been building a RICO case against their entire unit for 14 months. Racketeering, extortion, evidence tampering, civil rights violations." "How high does it go?" Elise asks. Washington answers, 3 precinct captains, 2 prosecutors in the DA's office, and... He hesitates. "We have evidence suggesting at least 1 federal judge may be involved." The room goes silent. Elise feels a cold weight settle in her stomach. "Judge Richard Hartman," she says quietly. Miller's eyebrows rise in surprise. "How did you know?" "Because he's fought every warrant, blocked every subpoena, and dismissed every case that could have exposed this. And because he plays golf with the police commissioner every Sunday." Washington opens his laptop. "We have recorded conversations, financial transactions, and testimony from 2 officers who've already flipped. But after today, after what happened in open court with dozens of witnesses, we don't just have a case," Miller finishes. "We have a battering ram." Elise stands and straightens her robe. "Then let's use it." When court reconvenes, the gallery has doubled in size. Word travels fast in a courthouse. FBI agents now flank the doors. Marcus Reynolds sits at the defense table, his mother beside him, both looking stunned by the turn of events. Judge Montgomery takes the bench, her expression revealing nothing of the storm brewing behind her calm exterior. "Before we proceed," she begins, "I want to address a matter of grave importance. Our justice system functions only when those who enforce the law, prosecute the accused, and adjudicate cases do so with integrity and equal application of justice for all citizens." She pauses, allowing her words to settle. "What we have uncovered suggests a systematic failure of that principle within this district. DOJ Attorney Washington will now present preliminary findings of a federal investigation that began 14 months ago and accelerated dramatically in the last 60 minutes. Washington stands, professional and focused. Your Honor, the Department of Justice's investigation has documented a pattern of civil rights violations, evidence tampering, witness, intimidation, and obstruction of justice involving the Narcotics Enforcement Team, to which Officers Palmer and Reeves belong. He presents exhibits methodically, financial records showing unexplained deposits to officers' accounts, body cam footage that mysteriously disappeared in dozens of cases, testimony from witnesses who were threatened into silence. And most disturbing, Washington continues, evidence that complaints against these officers were systematically buried by a network that extends beyond the police department into the prosecutor's office. And, He pauses significantly. Into the federal judiciary, the courtroom erupts. Judge Montgomery gavels repeatedly until order is restored. "Mr. Washington," she says, "you're making an extraordinary claim. I need more than implications." "Yes, Your Honor," he responds, producing a sealed envelope. This contains a request for the recusal and investigation of Judge Richard Hartman, based on evidence of judicial misconduct, including ex parte communications with targets of this investigation and financial transactions through offshore accounts linked to seized assets. Another shockwave passes through the courtroom. A reporter slips out the door, already calling his editor. Judge Montgomery accepts the envelope with steady hands. "This will be properly processed according to judicial procedure," she says. "Now, I want to hear from Marcus Reynolds." The young man stands, still bearing the visible scars of his encounter with Palmer and Reeves. He walks to the witness stand with dignity that belies his 19 years. After being sworn in, he tells his story simply, without embellishment. How he was walking home from his community college night class. How the unmarked police car pulled up. How he raised his hands immediately, having been taught by his father what to do if stopped by police. How the officers threw him against the wall, then to the ground. How they kept hitting him even after he was handcuffed. How they kept saying, "Stop resisting," even though he wasn't moving. How they planted a gun near him afterward. A gun that, ballistics would later show, had been used in an unsolved murder and had mysteriously disappeared from the evidence locker. And if my friend hadn't recorded it all from his apartment window, Marcus concludes, I'd be facing 20 years instead of sitting here today. The courtroom is silent when he finishes. No one moves. No one speaks. The weight of truth hangs in the air like smoke. "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds," Judge Montgomery says finally. "Your courage honors this court." She turns to address the entire courtroom, her voice resonant with purpose. "What we have witnessed today is both a failure and a promise. A failure of the systems meant to protect all citizens equally under the law, but also a promise that those systems can be corrected when brave individuals step forward, when evidence is brought to light, and when those entrusted with authority use it as it was intended." She looks at Marcus, then at Captain Bell, at Washington and Miller, and finally at the gallery filled with citizens whose faith in justice has been repeatedly tested. This court will issue the following orders. First, all cases involving testimony from Officers Palmer and Reeves will be reviewed for potential rights violations. Second, all members of their unit are suspended pending investigation. Third, the evidence presented regarding judicial misconduct will be referred to the appropriate judicial oversight body. She pauses, then adds, "And fourth, this court formally dismisses all charges against Marcus Reynolds with prejudice." Marcus's mother begins to weep quietly. He reaches over to take her hand. "This proceeding is far from over," Judge Montgomery continues. "It is, in fact, just beginning. The corruption exposed today did not develop overnight, and it will not be dismantled in a day. But make no mistake," her voice takes on a steel edge, "it will be dismantled." The gavel falls, and for perhaps the first time in that courtroom's history, its sound carries not just authority but promise. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarm like bees to nectar. The story is already breaking across local stations and spreading to national news. "Federal judge assaulted in courtroom, uncovers police corruption ring," reads the first headline. Judge Montgomery declines interviews, but issues a brief statement. Today's events are not about one judge, one case, or even two officers. They are about a system that has failed its most fundamental purpose: Equal justice under law. The work to correct that failure begins now. As darkness falls over Detroit, emergency meetings convene across the city. At the police department, the commissioner paces his office, phone calls going straight to voicemail as he tries to reach Judge Hartman. At the FBI field office, Agent Miller assembles her team for what will be the first of many late nights. In the federal prosecutor's office, Washington prepares indictments that will eventually name 37 individuals across multiple agencies. And in her chambers, Judge Elise Montgomery sits alone, finally allowing the events of the day to settle. She touches the small silver pin on her robe. Her husband's voice seems to whisper, "You did it, Elise. You opened the door." Her phone rings. Her clerk, warning that Judge Hartman is demanding to see her. She tells him to send Hartman in. The door opens moments later, and Richard Hartman, 65, silver-haired, with the confident bearing of a man who has never questioned his right to power, strides in without knocking. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Elise?" he demands, dispensing with titles or pleasantries. She looks at him calmly. "My job, Richard. Something you might want to reacquaint yourself with. You have no idea what you've started," he warns, leaning on her desk. "This isn't just about a couple of overzealous cops. You're threatening a system that maintains order in this city." "No," she corrects him. "I'm exposing a system that maintains inequality. There's a difference." "You won't win this," he says, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "You're one judge. We are many. We have reach you can't imagine." Judge Montgomery stands, matching his posture. "Perhaps, but I have something you don't, Richard." "And what's that?" he scoffs. "The truth. Documented, witnessed, and as of today, impossible to bury." She steps around her desk to open her door. "Now get out of my chambers before I call security and have a federal judge arrested twice in one day." Red-faced, Hartman leaves without another word. Elise knows the battle has just begun. There will be threats, certainly. Attempts to discredit her, to isolate her, to force her off the bench. But for the first time in decades, the fortress walls have been breached. Light now shines where darkness has ruled too long. 3 months later, Judge Montgomery sits in her chambers, reviewing the progress of what the press has dubbed the Palmer-Reeves investigation. 23 indictments so far, hundreds of cases under review. 7 officers have pleaded guilty in exchange for testimony against higher-ups. Judge Hartman has been suspended pending a judicial conduct investigation. The police commissioner has resigned. And Marcus Reynolds has started a community organization to support victims of police misconduct, funded in part by the substantial settlement the city paid him to avoid a federal civil rights lawsuit. There's a knock at her door, and Daniel enters with a small package. "This just came for you, Judge." She opens it carefully, a framed newspaper clipping. The headline reads, "Justice delayed, not denied. How one judge's courage exposed decades of corruption." With it, a simple note. "Thank you for showing us all what real strength looks like. Marcus Reynolds and family." Elise places the frame on her desk next to a photo of her late husband. Outside her window, Detroit continues its eternal struggle toward rebirth, toward something better. The path will never be simple or straight, but today it's a bit clearer than it was before. This isn't just a courtroom drama. It's a mirror held up to our society, reflecting both its deep-rooted flaws and its capacity for transformation. Judge Elise Montgomery's story reminds us that systems don't change by themselves. They change when brave individuals refuse to accept that what is must always be. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Like this video if you believe justice matters. Share it with someone who needs hope that change is possible. Subscribe. For more stories that challenge us to look deeper, fight harder, and never surrender the pursuit of true equality under law. Because real justice isn't just about punishment. It's about restoration. Rebuilding. Recommitting to promises too long broken but never beyond redemption. And that work begins with each of us, every day, in ways both small and profound. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Every story matters, every voice counts, and justice, though often delayed, must never be denied.